Welcome to the Hunger for Change podcast, where we explore fresh perspectives with leading voices in health and science. I'm your host, Niklas Gustafsson, and today I'm honored to welcome Professor Thomas Seyfried, a prestigious biologist and a pioneer in the study of cancer and metabolic therapies. Professor Seyfried earned his Ph.D. from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, enriching his expertise during his postdoctoral years at Yale University School of Medicine. At Boston College, he teaches biology, genetics, and biochemistry, shaping the minds of countless students with his insights into how diseases like cancer, epilepsy, and neurodegenerative disorders can be managed and prevented through specialized protocols like the keto diet. He's the author of The Cancer as a Metabolic Disease and a contributor to several leading scientific journals. So let's get ready for a fascinating conversation with the most prominent cancer biologist there is. Welcome, Professor Seyfried.
Well, thank you, Nicholas. It's nice to be here today.
There is so much I want to know about this topic. First of all, what does health mean to you?
Well, I think health is the absence of illness.
It's that simple, right?
Pretty much.
What's your story and how did your passion for medicine and science all start?
Well, I came to it by many different roads. It's not, you get a degree in classical genetics, and then you work in biochemistry. And, one thing leads to another as you begin to explore parts of nature. And it only became clear to us maybe 25 or 30 years ago on this cancer metabolism. But before that, it was purely basic science. It wasn't really linking to any disease that people have. Although we were working on Tay-Sachs disease, it's a lipid storage disease for many years. I'm still working on that. But, there's no straight path to any of this kind of stuff. You just have to follow where the science leads you and what your own interests are.
Why do people get cancer?
For many reasons. I've written about this, how cancer can be initiated. Most of it has to do with the advance of our diet and lifestyle technology as the origin. But how does that happen in one person versus another, or in one tissue versus another? And I broke that all down in resolving what we call the oncogenic paradox. That term, oncogenic paradox, was first mentioned by Albert Szent-Györgyi, who won a Nobel Prize, a Hungarian, for his work on vitamin C. But he raised the question, how is it possible that you could have so many things that have been associated with cancer and no one could figure out the common pathophysiological mechanism by which some guy smokes, some guy gets exposed to chemical carcinogens, some guy gets systemic inflammation, somebody inherits some kind of a gene, some people get exposed to viruses, some people just get older. How is it possible that all these conditions can be linked to a dysregulated growth of cells in a particular tissue, which is cancer? And all of it involves chronic disruption of energy through oxygen oxidative phosphorylation, which is what Otto Warburg originally said, and which we have absolutely confirmed as the origin of cancer. So any of those provocative agents can elicit a chronic disruption of energy through oxidative phosphorylation, leading to dysregulated cell growth and what we call cancer. And it can happen anytime, in any place, in any kind of an individual. But I would certainly say that our diet and lifestyle today in the Western world is a contributor towards damaging oxidative phosphorylation in some tissue or cell group.
Could you share what initially led you to investigate cancer as a metabolic disease rather than a genetic one? Because in Europe, we can hear that cancer is a genetic disease. And I know that in the US, there is something similar. You have, according to the National Cancer Institute, is that what it's called in the US? We have something very similar here. And for example, in Sweden, it's called the National Board of Health and Welfare. And that's what you can read there. And as you might know, in Europe, there are 3,500 people per day that die in cancer. I think the number in the US is 1,700 or so, something like that.
That's true. That's correct.
Yeah. So what led you to actually investigate cancer as a metabolic disease, not a genetic one?
Yeah, well, I think like most people, when I started my career, it was clear that for everyone that read books and textbooks, cancer was considered a genetic disease. I never questioned that. It was a silent assumption. I'm a I have a degree in genetics, and when it came to the section about somatic mutations and germline mutations and things like this, they would discuss various forms of cancer that seemed to be associated with various kinds of mutations, and we would study that and transmit that information to students. But it didn't occur to me that whole understanding is incorrect until you actually do the kind of research that would seriously question the foundational principles of the theory. And I started to do that, but I didn't do it purposefully. I did it because I was seeing things that were completely inconsistent with the dogmatic theory of cancer as a genetic disease. Completely inconsistent. Because I started to, don't forget, I worked in epilepsy for many, many years, and we were doing ketogenic metabolic therapy on little kids with seizures. And we began to look at the physiological changes that happen to the human body under fasting and therapeutic conditions. And everything, glucose goes down, ketones go up. And this is an evolutionarily conserved adaptation in our species. During the Paleolithic period of human existence on the planet, our ancestors were always in a state of ketosis because they didn't have a lot of high-carbo processed foods in the diet. Yeah. And they had a lot of exercise, all of which put together a physiological condition that was a semi-starved state. And that's how we evolved. And we were studying how epileptic seizures could be managed by these diets. And we noticed that when glucose was lower and ketones were elevated, many children would have their seizures managed, stop seizing. Well, we had a parallel experiments research going on in the lab in brain cancer because we were interested in the biochemistry of brain cancer in the form of glycolipids. Do glycolipids play some sort of a role in brain cancer? And it became clear as the two fields were parallel but not overlapping. I was getting research grants for studying biochemistry of brain cancer, and I was getting research grants to study metabolic therapy for epilepsy. So we had two parallel programs that were independent of each other. It only became clear when we started to look at a drug that was supposedly blocking glycolipid biosynthesis, and it did, but it also shrunk tumors, and we were very excited about that. The company that gave me this drug to study, we were all very excited. But then we learned that the mechanism of action of the drug was blocking sucrases in the gut, preventing the animal from obtaining energy from the food they were eating. And we noticed that the blood went down and the ketones went up, just like the epileptic managing seizures. And then when I put the control group of mice in there, because the animals ate the drug, their body weight became smaller, and their blood sugar went down. And we said we have to put in a control body weight group with no drug, just restrict the calories of food so their body weight would be the same as the guys eating the drug. And lo and behold, the tumor shrunk to the exact same degree. Whether as long as you cut the calories, it wasn't the drug attacking the biochemistry, it was the drug preventing the animal from getting energy from the food that it ate.
If you want to learn how to implement the ketogenic diet and the Press Pulse protocol into your cancer management, just visit school.com/keto for cancer, the new community by our research analyst Johnny Rockermeyer. Within this new community platform, you can connect with other patients and learn from their experiences. You can also just search through the posts other members have already made. You will have access to our classroom section as well, which provides practical advice and tools for the best results. These sections cover all parts of the Press Pulse protocol that you should implement. Starting with the general scientific concepts by Dr. Thomas Seyfried, we will show you how to start the ketogenic diet, including which foods to choose and which to avoid. Additionally, we prepared a list of doctors specialized in metabolic therapy, as well as details about glutamine inhibition and hyperbaric oxygen protocols. So, take a look around at school.com/keto for cancer.
So then we started to realize that calorie restriction, how did that block seizures? How did that block brain tumor growth? And it was the lower glucose elevate the ketones. So we noticed that a group from Case Western Reserve were treating little kids with brain cancer with ketogenic diets because it was lowering glucose and elevating ketones. And I said, wow, that seems to be interesting. Why would they do that? And it turns out they linked their findings to Otto Warburg. And I always heard of Otto Warburg, but I didn't know what he did. And because Otto Warburg said cancer cells can't grow unless they have a significant amount of sugar. glucose. I said, well, it seems very similar to the epilepsy thing. What's going on with that? And these little kids had high-grade gliomas, and she clearly showed that the shrinkage of the tumor was correlated with how low the blood sugar would go and how high the ketones went. And I said, well, it's the same thing we're looking at the epilepsy, because we can manage just the same thing. So a calorie restriction, I did a lot of work on epilepsy, published some of the seminal papers on how calorie restriction and ketogenic diets might stop seizures, but we really don't know the mechanism. So I started to shift over more towards the brain cancer because it looked like we had a clear mechanism by which the same therapy that we use in epilepsy could work even better in cancer. Then I started doing a deep dive on Warburg. Who the hell is this guy, this German from the 20th century? And he is a fascinating character himself, half Jew, why Hitler kept him alive during the Holocaust and all this kind of stuff. Because Hitler feared cancer. And he knew Otto Warburg was the leader in the world at the time. And if anybody was going to cure cancer, it would be Otto Warburg. So Hitler said he should not be touched. So then I started looking into what Warburg's research was all about. And he said, cancer comes as the result of chronic disruption of oxidative phosphorylation. That means the cancer cells don't use oxygen for dysregulated growth. They use a fermentation mechanism, which is energy without oxygen. And I said, wow, that's really interesting. How come nobody knows this? And they said, well, because cancer is a genetic disease. And they knew nothing about Otto Warburg. So I said, well, I mean, he seems to have some influence, interesting things here. So we did work on brain cancer, and we were able to show unambiguously that the lower the sugar, the slower the tumor went. The higher the sugar, the faster the tumor went. And that tumor cells can't burn ketones because the oxidative phosphorylation system is defective. So I immediately said, well, this is going to be the way we're going to manage cancer, because the tumor cell can't burn ketones or fatty acids like normal cells can. So we can shift the entire body over to nutritional ketosis and bring down glucose further. And then we published all the mechanisms by which this happens: anti-angiogenic, anti-inflammatory, pro-apoptotic. So we were finding killing cancer cells by all of the standard mechanisms that drugs would do it, but without toxicity. So this was an eye-opener to us. And I thought that, wow, this is like the greatest thing. How come the cancer field does not know about this? And I said, everybody knows cancer is a genetic disease. Everything else doesn't make any sense. So as a geneticist, I started going in and looking at the mutations and where they come from. It turns out that the defective mitochondria produce reactive oxygen species, which are carcinogenic and mutagenic. So it became clear to me that all these mutations that people thought was causing cancer was not, they were the effects. They weren't the cause, they were the effects.
Yeah.
So I said, wow, the whole field is studying effects. No wonder we have 1,700 people a day dying from cancer, because they're not studying the right thing. And then, of course, you look at the criticisms of Otto Warburg, and they said Warburg was wrong because cancer cells use oxygen just as effectively as normal cells. So I said, really? So I started doing a deep dive on that. It turns out that the cancer cells take in oxygen, but they don't use it for energy. They use it for making reactive oxygen species, which cause the mutations in the nucleus. So you got to know what's going on here. You have to be a good biologist and understanding evolution to know what I'm talking about. And it became more and more clear to me that almost the entire cancer field had almost no clue about the disease they were studying. They were not able to make evolutionary connections. So I started to look at evidence from nuclear mitochondrial transfer experiments done by the world's leading developmental biologists. And they weren't even studying cancer. They were just looking at, can a nucleus from a tumor cell direct normal development? That was their question. And I looked at frog experiments, mouse experiments, human experiments, all these different kinds of experiments where the nucleus of the tumor cell was placed into a normal cytoplasm, and it was turned, a cancer nucleus can direct normal development up until a stage, and then development would abort. On the other hand, when the nucleus of the normal cell was put into a tumor cytoplasm, what was found was either dead cells or neoplastic tumor cells. So I said, my God, this is clear evidence that cancer cannot be a genetic disease. It's something in the cytoplasm. What is in the cytoplasm that might be responsible for dysregulated cell growth? The mitochondria. Did anyone ever say the mitochondria might be involved? Yeah, Otto Warburg said it a long time ago. So I started doing a deep dive on mitochondria structure and function in all these different cancer cells. And you have to do electron microscopy work. And I just went back in the literature and I said, look at every major cancer that we know of in humans and mouse and rats and all kinds of animals. They all have defective oxidative phosphorylation and they're all fermenting. This is the simplest damn thing. All you have to do is connect the dots.
Yeah.
And now we're realizing that all major cancers in the clinic are known to grow much faster with the higher blood sugar the person has.
Yeah.
And they all know that if you lower the blood sugar, the cancers grow much, much slower. So this became very clear, linked to, and why? Because the mitochondria are defective. And not only that, we now know that mitochondria control the cell cycle. In other words, the regulation of growth is controlled by the organelle that makes the energy in the cell. So when that organelle becomes kaput or dysfunctional, the cell falls back. Ancient pathways of fermentation that were responsible for the life on the planet before oxygen came into the atmosphere 2.5 billion years ago. So these cancer cells are doing nothing more than fermenting the way all organisms did before, because they grow in the absence of oxygen. Otto Warburg received his Nobel Prize for work by discovering cytochrome C oxidase, which is the respiratory enzyme. And he showed that cancer cells, if you pour cyanide on a cancer cell, that they live. So cyanide will kill us real fast, but it doesn't kill a cancer cell because they're not using oxygen. They're fermenters. Yeah. So once you know they can't live. So then we said, what do they ferment? Otto Warburg clearly said that they ferment glucose.
Yeah.
And that was his big thing. Glucose, glucose, glucose. But in my book, I entertained the idea for the first time that cancer cells may also ferment an amino acid called glutamine. Everybody in the cancer field knows that glutamine is a prime fuel for cancer cells. The big problem, they all thought it was respired. And I said, you can't. They said, oh, it's a respiratory fuel. But the cancer cells can't respire anything. So I said, well, that's not respiration. It has to be fermentation. So I started to look into this, and then I got a hold of the top guy in the world on this, Dr. Shidapoulos from Semmelweis. So I brought this attention to his attention that maybe glutamine is fermented. He looked at the data, and he clearly said, yes, this is a fermentation, mitochondrial fermentation metabolism. So you have fermentation in the cytoplasm, according to what Warburg said. Yeah. And what we discovered is you have fermentation in the mitochondria. Mitochondrial substrate level phosphorylation is a mitochondrial fermentation metabolism that can work in the absence of oxygen. This fooled everybody. So they all thought glutamine was being respired because it's coming out of the mitochondria and they were taking in oxygen. I showed that the oxygen is not being used for oxidative phosphorylation. It's being a reactive oxygen species production, and that the energy coming out of the mitochondria was coming through a fermentation metabolism. It's unbelievable. This clearly showed Otto Warburg was correct, clear a lot of the mess, and now present the way cancer cells are getting their energy through a novel fermentation mechanism. So now we know what cancer is, we know where it comes from, and we know how to manage it. The problem is the rest of the world never heard of this. So you're stuck in this void.
So to shut off the supply of glucose, that's easy, right? You can just be on a ketogenic diet. But to shut off the supply of glutamate, that's harder, right?
Yeah, once you know what you need to do, then the strategies become clear. So that's why we developed the press pulse therapeutic strategy, where we pulse glutamine targeting. Glutamine is an essential amine for many functions of the body. If you go in and
I said glutamate. It's glutamine. Sorry.
Glutamine. Yes, glutamine.
Yeah.
Glutamine is metabolized to glutamate.
Yeah.
Glutamate is then transaminated to alpha-ketoglutarate, which is part of the TCA Krebs cycle.
Yeah.
Right? And then alpha-ketoglutarate is metabolized to succinyl-CoA.
Yeah.
Now, that succinyl-CoA contains a phosphate group on histidine 226, I believe, which is then transferred to ADP or GTP to make energy. Cancer cells dump out succinic acid. Normal cells keep succinic acid that's metabolized to fumarate and then malate and around. So the difference between normal cells and cancer cells is they respire and they keep succinate in the TCA cycle to be used for reducing equivalents to do energy through oxidative phosphorylation. Cancer cells dump out succinic acid into the media. Let me give you an example. And this is how we draw information from different fields of science. And I always use this when people have a heart attack, cardiac arrest. two fuels immediately appear in the bloodstream, and that's lactic acid and succinic acid. They immediately appear in the bloodstream because no more oxygen is coming into the system. The heart stops beating. So in order for the cells to survive, they have to ferment. What do they ferment? They ferment glucose and glutamine. Okay, so immediately you see the waste products of these inefficient fermentation pathways rise up inside the bloodstream. As soon as the person starts breathing again, the lactic acid and the succinic acid go back down to baseline levels because fermentation is shut off. The difference between a temporary heart attack and a cancer cell, the cancer cell is locked into the fermentation metabolism all the time. So you always see lactic acid and succinic acid coming out of the tumor cells. Why? Because the mitochondria are intrinsically inefficient in generating energy from oxidative phosphorylation. In the heart attack, the mitochondria were just inhibited because there was no oxygen. As soon as the oxygen came back, they started to respire again, thereby not needing fermentation metabolism. But when the cancer cell has a permanent damage to the mitochondria, it's locked into a fermentation metabolism and therefore can only grow with the two fermentable fuels, glucose and glutamine, which now tells us exactly how we're going to manage the disease. We just have to restrict the glucose and glutamine. And you said it's very easy to do glucose, which it is, but it requires some knowledge of not damaging immune system, gut, and urea cycle, all the things that glutamine does. And that's why we pulse the glutamine. It's a strategy. Well, it's going to eventually become the standard of care. I mean, because it's based on hard science. It's based on a complete understanding of what's going on in the cancer cell, and enough to know that you can manage all forms of cancer by simultaneously restricting glucose and glutamine while the body is transitioned to nutritional ketosis. I just told you the solution to the cancer problem. We can manage the cancer much more effectively without toxicity, and overall survival and quality of life will be significantly improved once people know that this is how to do it. It's a mitochondrial metabolic disorder driven by fermentation metabolism, and the only two fermentable fuels. How do we know that? Because we did the experiments ourselves. We throw cancer cells into saline solution, which is no food, nothing. And then we take a stopwatch and see how long it takes them to die. Okay, and they die in 24 hours, they're all dead. So then you start adding fuel back and say, what keeps them alive? Whoa, boom, boom. You see glutamine, wow, they just jump up a little bit. Then you add the glucose and boom, even in saline solution, they will grow. So they grow even better if you throw in a little micronutrients from the serum and everything. So you know exactly what these cells, and we can't find another amino acid as powerful as glutamine. We've interrogated these cells. It's not like, oh, we can substitute a different amino acid. They can, but very poor. And then you have to ask, well, if you're going to drive a beast with inefficient energy, you have to have pathways that are going to allow that to come into the cell, and you're going to have a logistic supply of these inefficient fuels in the microenvironment. And the most abundant amino acid in the body is glutamine, and glucose is taken in from almost every meal that we eat. So the fuels for driving the dysregulated growth are abundant. And we know because they can burn a little bit of asparagine, but there's just a minuscule amount in the environment. So it goes through that real quick. So you got to have a sustained amount of logistical supply of fermentable fuels to keep this regulated growth of the cancer cell. So we give radiation and chemo, which makes the body make glucose. It's just incredible. Most of the stuff that we do contributes to the demise of the patients by damaging their normal mitochondria and by doing all these other kinds of things that are not targeting the essential, the necessity of fermentation. So everything that I see in the cancer industry, I can explain based on the misunderstanding of what the nature of the disease is. Understanding and misunderstanding of why we get what we have.
Okay, so this way you can not only prevent a cancer patient, but you can also cure.
I don't like to use the term because it's an arrogant term. We have no clue. If you have cancer now, you're a young guy, and we do metabolic therapy, and you die at 97 years old and cancer never came back, then we could say that metabolic therapy. Yeah. But I can't be sure. You might be managed for 10, 15 years, and all of a sudden something comes back. Yeah. They say, see, you didn't cure cancer. Well, we don't know. I mean, nobody does anyway. So, I mean, anything you give somebody, they're not curing anything. I mean, they might have people that are living longer. And yes, there are some people we call cancer survivors.
Yeah.
There are many, many cancer survivors throughout the world whose body tolerated massive poisoning and radiation.
Yeah.
But they pay a price. And oftentimes cancers come back in different organs and they die from prematurely from heart disease and liver failure, kidney failure. They die from all these other things because they were poisoned and irradiated by the ignorance of the system. So, it's called management. We like to use the term, can we manage cancer? And the answer is yes, we can manage cancer.
So my father actually died of a kind of cancer called myeloma, kind of blood cancer, and he had it for 7 years before he eventually died of it. And yeah, of course, you could see he was the cancer treatments. They were really hard on him. He, the typical you lose your hair, your immune system gets weakened, and that's horrible to see for someone that is near.
Absolutely, it's hard to see for every kind of these cancer, whether it's a glioblastoma, liver cancer, colon cancer, bladder cancer, breast cancer. They all have these horrible treatments, and we know myeloma is also. Mitochondria damaged in myeloma. All right. Okay. So what does the myeloma need to survive? Glucose and glutamine. Why was your father not? They didn't take glucose and glutamine away. He would have done much better. He would not have suffered like that.
Yeah.
And that's another weird thing. You say, "Well, I'm treated, and my hair is falling out." Why your hair falls out? You're trying to kill cancer cells, aren't you? Why would you go bald? What does the hair? The cancer cells don't live inside the hair follicles.
Yeah.
This tells us they have no clue, understanding of killing cancer. We can kill cancer cells by taking away their glucose and glutamine and transitioning the normal body over to ketones. That means you don't have to lose your hair. You don't have to suffer all these horrible side effects because you're specifically targeting the tumor cells for their incapability of doing anything other than fermentation. So the strategy that we will develop eventually, that will become the standard of care, will involve managing cancer without toxicity because we know how to kill them. And the science is solid. So, and I've done all the experiments, and many others have done these experiments. Sometimes they just didn't know what they were looking at, but they were getting the same kind of results.
Yeah, it makes sense what you're telling me because I think that my father was that he had diabetes, and we didn't know. But I mean, this was 17 years ago, and I came to realize now after that he probably, because he had a clear sugar addiction. He loved sugar. Everything with sugar, he was just he loved it. So I think that he has diabetes, and this makes sense what you're telling me. So what are the primary risk factors to cancer?
Well, I think you just said diabetes.
Yeah.
Elevated sugar creates systemic inflammation, and inflammation will damage oxidative phosphorylation mitochondria in some cells. Your dad got myeloma, but other people with type 2 diabetes get colon cancer. Sometimes they get breast cancer. It can be very individual kinds of whatever cell is damaged by this. And sometimes it's a combination of damage. Obesity is now replacing smoking as a major cause of cancer, but that's often associated with type 2 diabetes. So you have diabetes, obesity, lack of exercise. You have a whole variety, exposure to chemical carcinogens. Any combination of these risk factors together can damage oxidative phosphorylation in some population of cells in some tissue. So, but we all know they're all linked to a common pathophysiological mechanism, which is dysfunctional OXPHOS coupled to a compensatory fermentation of glucose and glutamine. No matter where they come, no matter where they are, they all have common phenotype, and but they're all genetically different. So when you do genetic analysis, the mutations that you see in myeloma may be different from colon cancer, may be different from breast cancer. And as a matter of fact, if you take a tumor out of someone's body, a solid tumor, or even blood cells, blood cancers, and you look at each cell, and then you do an expansion of the genome in that cell and do a complete genomic sequence of all the different kinds of genetic alterations. There's no two cells in a tumor, despite the hundreds of millions of cells in the tumor. There's no two cells that have the same genetic mutations. Yet every cell in the tumor is fermenting. So what the cancer field, because they're locked into the incorrect theory, they think it's a genetic disease, and therefore they're going to try to target genetic mutations and try to manage the disease that way. And you hear them all talking about what kind of mutation this guy has or that guy has. They might have that for sure, but not every cell in their tumor has the same mutation. Now, here's the situation. Every cell in that tumor is fermenting. So what they fail to realize that I can do a much better job at killing all the tumor cells if I target the common problem that all the cells have, rather than some of the unique problems that only a few of the cells have. Now, as what I just said to you, does that seem complicated? Let me ask you that. Does that
No, it doesn't seem complicated.
Well, how in the hell do all the major cancer centers in the world not know that?
So what is the answer?
The answer is, in fact, I don't know. It's a perplexing thing.
Right.
I sometimes think I'm talking to plug sockets and things. I have no idea. What I think is a dogma. It's an ideology. I think they have been so brainwashed and indoctrinated to think this is a genetic disease, they can't think of anything else. Yeah. And actually, Leo Tolstoy said the same thing, the Russian author. Yeah. He said it's sometimes easier to explain a complicated thing to a simple person and a simple thing to a guy who's already made up his mind what he thinks he knows it about already. And I think the ideological dogma is so powerful on the brain. You can't think outside your dogmatic view. And if you were raised, it's like a religion. A dogma. You're indoctrinated, brainwashed into a way of thinking, and no matter what someone says, you cannot transition from one dogmatic view to another. It's a lock hold on rational thinking, and the cancer industry has come to realize that cancer is a genetic disease, and it's a lock hold on their brain, and they can't think outside that. And then, of course, you have the revenue generation system. The people make billions of dollars on treating cancer.
That might be one of the explanations, right? The economic interests behind.
Yeah, you can't get a man to recognize something when his salary depends on him not recognizing it. Mm-hmm. So you put all that together and you have a complete resistance to moving the field forward for a variety of different reasons.
So what do you think has to happen for these health professionals to open their minds outside this imposed dogma?
I think when you start to see people who are given terminal diagnoses walking around living far longer with a healthier quality of life, eventually there's enough of these people that are going to walk around and they're going to say to the doctor, I want to be like that guy. Can you treat me like that guy who's alive over there? And so I think it's the evidence that eventually comes from seeing people who were given terminal diagnoses who are not terminal or alive far longer than their diagnosis. They always say, oh, he's got 9 months to live, or he's got maybe a year left. Who are these people to say that,
But do you see this happening anytime soon? I mean, working with the future generation of health professionals, are things looking brighter?
I think so, because the word is starting to get out. And, you can only deny the science for so long. I mean, I go back and look how long it took the Catholic Church to accept the fact that the sun was the center of the solar system. Back in those days, they burned Bruno Giordano at the stake in Rome, for crying out loud, burned his ass up for when he challenged the dogma. And then Galileo was house arrested. So it took the science, they didn't even want to look in the microscope and the telescope to prove that Galileo was supporting Copernican theory. And the clerics didn't even want to look in the telescope to prove what they were saying. So it took centuries for the church to accept this fact. And now, of course, the sun is the center of the solar system. But there was a time when that was not accepted because you were challenging the power to be. And the power to be was that the humans, we were the center and the church was the center of our existence. And when you found out that was not the case, you were challenging power. And when you challenge power, you can get a backlash. And in those days, they burn you up or house arrest you. So today they ignore you. They just ignore it.
But I mean, look what happened with fearing saturated fats. That was something that people thought for 60, 70 years. But now it's a myth that has been debunked. But that was recently.
Which one was that?
I mean, animal fats, butter and lard, and
we evolved on animal fats. You're killing an elephant. You don't think there's any fat on his body? I mean, We live to kill animals.
But I mean, it took us 60, 70 years to debunk that myth.
Yeah, well, I think, for the nutrition guys, they're all messed up anyway, when you have upside down food pyramids and all this kind of stuff. But, I try to select what I do. I mean, right now we've got people dying, 1,700 people a day in the United States, like you said, 3,000 in Europe, and because of an incorrect theory. So they're dying as the result of an incorrect theory of the nature of the disease. Yeah. So if your job is to bring the attention that the theory of cancer, it's called a mitochondrial metabolic disorder. It's not a genetic disorder. So you have two competing theories. The somatic mutation theory, which says that cancer is caused by somatic mutations that lead to dysregulated cell growth, or the mitochondrial metabolic theory, saying that the dysregulated cell growth is the result of a transition from oxphos to fermentation, and the mutations which are there are secondary downstream effects, not the cause. So this is the whole thing.
All right.
Once the science becomes clear, you operate under a theory, and if the theory is correct, the outcomes will be better because you understand the situation better. Right now, the field persists with toxic chemicals and radiation and immunotherapies, which are all based on the somatic mutation theory. So they're not going to be optimal in managing cancer for the majority of people on the planet. Once you realize it's a metabolic disorder, you will get management and much greater capability. So your question is, how do we get the field to know that? Why don't you read the damn literature and understand it for yourself? Because they don't do that. They rely on some other guy telling them what to think. So it's hard for people to think. Yeah. We have mostly followers in this world. There's only a few thinkers, and that can be very good or very bad for certain things.
We were talking about the nutrition, and you mentioned the food pyramid being turned upside down, right? Does meat cause cancer?
No, of course not. What the hell, man? How is meat going to damage mitochondria? We evolved to eat meat, for Christ's sake. And we look at the Paleolithic men. We look at Aboriginal tribes that follow their standard diet lifestyles. Cancer is unheard of, right? So, we evolved to eat meat. If we didn't eat meat, you and I would never have this conversation. We would have been extinct.
Right.
Of course, eat meat. We didn't evolve to eat grass, or vegetables. We would have been dead, extinct. And yes, sweet things. As a species, we love sweet things because sweet was so rare in Paleolithic times. Where are you going to get something sweet? You think there's a donut shop on every corner? No. Where are we going to get cakes and pastries and all this kind of stuff? We didn't have it. So we would have honey, and we'd have to learn how to make the bees indolent while we could get the honey. So I always wanted to know who was the first guy to smoke bees so they wouldn't sting you while you could collect the honey. Because the dumbass bear has to get his face all stung because he's not smart enough to know how to make the bees indolent.
What about obesity? Would you say that obesity is a disease?
No, of course not. We have so many jackasses, people who have no functional brain cells. Stupid stuff like that. We evolved to store energy. If we didn't store energy, we would have not existed on the planet. All of a sudden, we're put into an environment where all of the things we've always craved are now at our fingertips, and all of a sudden we become obese. As a matter of fact, those people who don't understand evolution, they don't understand biological evolution, obesity is evolution in action. This is what happens when we evolved over hundreds of thousands of years in the absence of high carbohydrate foods. And then all of a sudden you put that same organism in an environment with an abundance of high carbohydrate foods. Our natural ability to store energy is there, and you get very, very fat because the fattest people are the descendants of those that survived the hardest times hundreds of thousands of years ago. So obesity is evolution in action. Exactly. And that's what it is. We evolved to store energy. That was the way we could survive. Human beings are remarkably able to go for long periods of time without food. But because we have this incredible capability, because we moved out of our original space in Africa, and we survived ice ages, and we survived moving all over the planet, because we move and we store energy. And now all of a sudden, we're in environments where we no longer move, we're sedentary, and we're eating highly processed carbohydrate foods. and we get fat.
When I hear what you say, you mean that we have a significant amount of control when it comes to whether we develop cancer in our lifetimes. Is that right?
Absolutely. But the problem is that knowledge is not generally known. You can't believe how many people do not know that obesity is linked to cancer. They don't have any. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Well, you don't read anything. You know, you got to. I in my university, I spent a lot of time scientific literacy. It could save your life. Most people have they have no scientific literacy. They don't know how to interpret data. They don't look at things. They have no clue how their body works. But you're absolutely 100% right. Most of cancers can be prevented. The problem is when you tell people, well, how do I prevent cancer? Well, you got to really restrict your ability to eat highly processed carbohydrates, and you have to exercise a lot more, just like our Paleolithic ancestors that didn't have cancer. Well, I'm not sure I want to do that. Well, then that's your choice. Now, the problem, of course, is that smoking was very common everywhere, at least in the United States, maybe in Europe. I don't know what
Europe as well.
You know, and everybody knew smoking cigarettes would put you at risk for cancer and all kinds of other diseases, you know, lung diseases and all kinds of stuff. But people continued to smoke, even though they knew the risk factor. But it only became changed when your smoking habit puts someone else at risk for health. So secondhand smoke. You're bothering me. You're hurting my child with your smoking. And then the society said, oh, we can't smoke inside anymore. You have to go outside. And it became a societal peer pressure kind of restriction because your habit was putting my health at risk. The obesity problem is not doing that directly. That fat guy sitting on the bench is not affecting my personal health, right?
Another problem, is that children, they have sugar since they are 1 or 2 years old, and children at that age never smoke.
Right, and now we're getting children that are obese.
Yeah,
and what's happening is that when I was a kid, eating sugar cereals but we were outside running and jumping and climbing all the time.
Yeah.
We weren't sitting in front of computers and cell phones. We didn't have any of that stuff. So now you eat all the sugar cereals and you go to the next room and you work on your cell phone all day long or chat or whatever. And that's lack of exercise.
Lack of exercise, lack of sun exposure, lack of fresh air, lack of grounding, being separated from nature completely.
100%. Absolutely. And you put all that together and you create an environment that's going to contribute to a broad range of chronic diseases.
Yeah.
That society now must spend more and more money on expensive therapies that are draining the wealth of nations into treating a preventable condition. That's basically what it is. Yeah. So, and makes jobs and makes money for a lot of industries. A lot of people get rich doing this stuff. So maybe it's good for the economy. I don't know. I mean, if you say to a cancer patient, you have a very valuable function. Your sickness is generating a large revenue-generating industry, keeping major Western societies functional. So be thankful that you have this contributed. You can't say that to a person with cancer. It's insensitive, but that's the truth. And their sickness is driving huge industries. Yeah. And I'm coming along saying maybe we can live longer. Oh no, can't do that. We don't want that.
So talking about living longer, Professor Seyfried, could you explain the relationship between aging and cancer risk? Do you believe that cancer is inevitable if we just live long enough?
No, I don't believe it's inevitable. I mean, we have people that are centurions that are dying basically from old age, who never have cancer. If you continue diet lifestyles that put you at risk, then for sure cancer becomes more common in older folks. What I'm seeing now, though, which is really shocking, is the younger people getting cancer. It's unbelievable. I mean, in the 20s and 30s with colon cancer and breast cancer and this kind of thing. This is like something's going on here.
Yeah,
in society, something is going on.
Is this a change that you've seen recently?
Yes, absolutely. I would say within the last 10 years, we're seeing much.
Really?
Yeah, much more. And it's all linked to our diet and lifestyle issues. But as far as longevity, don't forget there's the mitochondrial theory of aging. It's called the second entropy, second law of thermodynamics, which is disorder. So eventually our bodies give out and we die because disorder, we reach equilibrium, where the energy efficiency in our body is no longer capable of preventing us from reaching equilibrium. And that's usually a generalized failure in mitochondrial energy. I always like to look at Queen Elizabeth from England, who passed away not long ago. I mean, one day, I always say she's like healthy and shaking the hand of the new British Prime Minister that only lasted a week or so. I can't remember how long it was. But then 2 days later, the poor woman's dead. Mm. And I'm saying, and she died of old age. And this is the way people are supposed to die. You're supposed to be healthy right up until your body realizes that the second law of thermodynamics has overtaken your ability to remain away from equilibrium. And that's the natural way of things. Cancer is accelerated entropy. So essentially your body is aging faster through a variety of pressures on the thermodynamic. In other words, you're accelerated the second law of thermodynamics. So, and to be exposed to radiation and chemicals damages mitochondria and healthy tissue, thereby enhancing the second law of thermodynamics, entropy, putting you at risk for dying earlier than someone who was not exposed to these mitochondrial damaging agents. So you can put it all together. If you understand evolutionary biology and biochemistry, you can kind of make sense out of what's happening in most folks.
So you already mentioned how we can prevent cancer. Could you go a little into how we can use fasting as targeting cancer cells? Is that a way?
It's very difficult to get cancer in healthy mitochondria. So if the mitochondria is respiring, that cell is not fermenting because respiration is efficient. And what we have found through bioenergetic studies with my late colleague, Richard Veach from the NIH, when you burn ketones, you produce less reactive oxygen species. You maximize the energy efficiency of mitochondria. How do you elevate ketones? Well, you're in the nutritional ketosis. Will keep your mitochondria super healthy, thereby preventing cancer from developing and many other chronic diseases for that matter. And that's the way we evolved as a species. The nutritional ketosis, now, of course, our ancestors during the Paleolithic period would die from infections, and they would die from broken bones, and they would die from things that we now can correct with modern medicine. But at the same time, we can correct some things, and then we put ourselves at risk for other things. So mitochondria health is ultimately responsible for how long you can live on the planet in a healthy or undiseased state. So, so cancer prevention. But as I said, doesn't seem like most people are interested in prevention because we have an obesity epidemic. And then, of course, if you have cancer, then the way to target that is remove the fermentable fuels while allowing the rest of the cells of the body to be healthy by burning ketones. So you protect the normal cells while simultaneously targeting the tumor cells. So we've published this in the Press Pulse. I published a big paper on this. This is the framework by which we're going to manage all cancers that will be eventually the standard of care. And now we're working out dosage, timing, and scheduling of the various drugs and procedures that will all work together in a unified whole, enhancing the health of the normal cells while restricting the viability of the tumor cells. And it's all based on evolutionary biology and biochemistry that was not all connected together like we've done.
What about the plastic pollution? Does microplastics impact our health when it comes to cancer?
Yeah, because what happens is the microplastics are collected in cells. This is the way asbestos was another kind of a non-degradable kind of molecule. Asbestos is considered a carcinogen because it creates systemic inflammation in cells that would take up the asbestos particles, thereby creating oxidative stress on mitochondria, leading to reduced OXPHOS with a compensatory fermentation. It's possible that the accumulation of plastics in various cells will have the same kind of an effect as does asbestos, maybe not as acutely for sure. But you put that in an environment where blood sugars are high and exercise is low, and you put higher risk.
Yeah,
we can explain most of these things because we thought about them. The questions you ask me, we talk about all the time, and we think about it. and we look at the scientific literature to see if there's any evidence to support to get more clear answers to these things. And the answer is yes.
When it comes to, different kinds of cancer, we mentioned myeloma, it could be skin cancer, lung cancer. Are there different, or you didn't want to use the name, you said management, right? Or how to deal with the cancer. Is that different when it comes to each kind of cancer?
Yeah, well, this is the big thing. Everybody thinks all these cancers are different from each other. They're not. How do I know that? Because I went through the scientific literature over years and looked at all the different kinds of cancers, and they all have the same kind of problem. Lung cancer, colon cancer, bladder cancer, they have damage oxidative phosphorylation. And the other thing that's very interesting that we have a paper under review now. All these cancers, regardless of what kind they are, they have these lipid droplets in the cytoplasm. You're going to love this. If you look at them under the microscope, you see all these vacuoles in the cancer cells. Myeloma, bladder, breast, doesn't make any difference. They got all these vacuoles. So the field thinks that the cancer cell needs so much energy, they're using lipids so fast that they need to store them for energy. In fact, we have shown it's just the opposite. They store the fatty acids because the mitochondria are defective and they can't burn them. So we see lipid droplets in the cytoplasm of all major cancers, and we see mitochondrial abnormalities in all major cancers. They're the same damn disease. It just happens in different cells. This is a hard pill to swallow for the entire cancer industry, where they're saying, oh, we have the therapy for your cancer, or we have a different therapy. This is absurd. These people have no clue. I should say these people should understand the biology. How is it possible that they don't know the biology of the disease they're working with? Is it possible that we have people treating other human beings on this planet, and the person treating the patient and the treater, neither of them have any knowledge about the biology of what's being treated? The blind leading the blind in this kind of situation. It's an embarrassment to our species. I can't believe we allowed ourselves as a rational thinking species to become so clueless when it comes to any of the stuff that I'm speaking about.
Is there anything that you would like to add? Something that you think that I missed that our listeners need to know?
Yeah, I think that the field will change dramatically once people realize that cancer is a mitochondrial metabolic disorder and not a genetic disorder. And you want to see how fast you're going to get slapped down. Go to all your top cancer clinics and you tell them that, and they'll throw you out saying you're some sort of a nut, some sort of a psychopathic guy. This guy's running. You see, so you listen to what I say, and it makes perfect sense. I have all the scientific evidence to support it. It's in the scientific literature. And then when you go to the oncology clinic, they never heard of anything. I mean, let your listeners go and try it and see what they think. Let them go and see. They'll say glucose is no, not a problem. Glucose is good for cancer. Get your glucose as high as you can. I mean, it's like nuts. So you live in two different worlds here.
Yeah.
And that's the evidence. You want to know? Just go and know that. But I tell you, we can't make any major progress in managing cancer until people realize, and the field comes to realize, it's a mitochondrial metabolic disorder, and it's not a genetic disorder. And once we make that, we'll drop the death rate significantly.
Let's hope that this changes then soon. Are there any exciting new projects that you're working on?
Well, I think we're working on diet-drug combos where we can, some of these cancer drugs that have been thrown in the can for lack of efficacy, we're pulling back out of the can, and we're showing that they're extremely powerful when used under the right dietary conditions. So we're going to open up a whole new field of research by re-examining many drugs that were thought to be ineffective or too toxic, and show that under the right use, under the right dietary condition, in certain changed dosages, some of these drugs that were so-called promising are actually very, very therapeutic. It's just that you need to know how to use them in the right conditions. So, we've thrown so many different drugs into the can because they were causing too much toxicity and killing people. We're resurrecting some of these drugs and showing, oh my God, they're extremely powerful when you have a patient in nutritional ketosis. Why are we throwing them all away? So we're going to reinvigorate the drug industry when they realize that their drugs can have new power when placed in a patient under the right dietary metabolic condition.
Professor Seyfried, where can people find you?
All of the major papers that we have published are on the web, open access. So anybody who would like to, because I can't do a thorough, deep discussion on the biochemistry in a short period of time. So you have to see the evidence for yourselves. Breast cancer, brain cancer, we've done all these different kinds of things. And open access. Anybody with a computer can go onto Google and pull up our scientific papers, and they can read them for themselves. And then if they think we're right, they can make donations to my research at Boston College right on my faculty webpage, or they can support the foundation. Don't forget, all of our research is coming from private foundations and philanthropy.
Really?
So philanthropy, there are guys, I keep telling, there are rich people who want to be a part of this transitional change. And they're willing to support our research because we're moving forward faster than any of the other avenues of research, even though most of the people ignore what we're saying. But they will be shown to be correct because we have the science behind us.
Is there a message that you would like to send to the young generations that will be the future of science and health advancements?
That's a good point, because they have not yet been indoctrinated. And they can have an open mind, and they can test what I'm saying themselves. Yeah. And also in animals, dogs. Our evidence is really strong when you see these dogs that are all dying from cancer, and you're reversing their cancer or destroying the tumors by transitioning the diets of the dogs. I published a big paper on that. They can look, metabolic therapy for mast cell cancer in the dog. So the dogs respond just as well as the humans. Humans respond the best. Mice are not I use mice to get the work, but the mice don't respond nearly as well as dogs or humans. So it's just something for people to recognize. But I think, so I think you've asked a lot of very, very good questions. And I think that my answers could be in the way I deliver my answers. But people can get the deep science if you go right to the papers and see this.
We will add some links to when we post this discussion, this podcast.
If they have scientific literacy and they're willing to open their minds, they'll see the evidence for what I'm saying.
Professor Seyfried, thank you so much. This has been really fascinating. It's been very interesting, and I appreciate very much that you took your time to share your wisdom with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, too. Nice speaking with you.